If you're watching this program, we assume that you've attended a live football game. Perhaps maybe you were a participant, a coach, or even somebody on the sideline like an official. Well, one thing that we know for sure is during that game, you probably looked to see what down it was. And most likely, if you didn't look at the scoreboard, you looked at the down marker on the sideline with the chain crew. Well, we're going to talk about a gentleman that invented a certain type of down marker with Timothy P. Brown of footballarchaeology.com. And Tim comes up in just a moment to tell us the history of the flip down marker in just a moment.
This is the Pigskin Daily History Dispatch, a podcast that covers the anniversaries of American football events throughout history. Your host, Darren Hayes, is podcasting from America's North Shore to bring you the memories of the gridiron, one day at a time.
Hello, my football friends. This is Darren Hayes of pigskindispatch.com. Welcome once again to the Pig Pen, your portal for positive football history. And welcome to another Tuesday where we have our friend Timothy P. Brown of footballarchaeology.com to tell us about another aspect of football history that maybe is not mainstream and we don't know much about, but we're going to learn something today. Tim, welcome back to the Pig Pen.
Hey, Darren, good to see you. And I think this podcast will have people flipping out.
Well, I'm definitely flipping out about it because but your subject matter that you're going to talk about today is something that's near and dear to my heart, being a former official, something that I use quite a bit. You had an article back in May called Colonel Roy Baker and the Flip Style Down Marker. Now, this is something I'm very familiar with in my early days of officiating, and love to hear the history of it.
Yeah. Well, so depending on when the listeners came of age in terms of their, football fandom, if they're some kind of youngin', they might only remember the louvered down markers where, the guy.
The dial-a-downs.
Yeah, the dial-a-downs, exactly. But before that, there were there were a number of different variations on, first there were chains and then they, created down markers or down boxes, which initially were just boxes, on a stick with a 1, 2, 3, or 4 on the 4 sides of the box. And so, but none of those were entirely satisfactory because, depending on which direction you had the down marker pointing, then if they were in a different position in the stadium or on the field, they saw a different number. So there was always some confusion there. And this is a lot of times in the days before there were really effective scoreboards that would tell you the down. So there's this guy, Roy C. Baker, who was a 1932 South Dakota grad. He was an ROTC there. He was a cheerleader. I didn't find any information about him playing football in high school or in college, but I suspect he played in high school. He was from a small town in South Dakota, so I'm sure they needed every athlete that they could get. And he, seemed like a fairly athletic guy. So, he graduates from South Dakota in 32, and he taught for a couple of years in South Dakota high school, and then he moves to Wyoming. And he, at each of those places, he's these are small community high schools. He's the football coach and the basketball coach, and pretty successful in both. Sometimes a little tough in the first year or two that he was coaching, but he had some pretty good teams, especially in basketball, actually. But for whatever reason, in the late 30s, he became dissatisfied with the way that the down boxes worked in football. And football had tried a lot of different solutions. There were different, now we're using chips, I guess, but they tried different things like surveying kind of tools to line it up properly, and some kind of crazy things to try to get accuracy. But his solution was much more focused on the fans and the players on the field than just the visibility of the down on the down markers. So he's the guy who came up with the flip style down marker. And he kind of prototyped it just using sheets of paper. And if you think about it, and I wrote about it. I kind of went through the sequence in the written article, but it's like, okay, so the one on one side of the sheet has to be matched with a two on the other side, and then a two matched with a three, and a three matched with a four, and then a four matched with a one, in order for the numbers to correspond. So both sides are displaying either a one, a two, a three, or a four. And so he figured that out, and it's like so obvious to anybody who looks at it, like
And,
it's like, why didn't anybody think of that years
and the
before?
number's got to be upside down too, the number on the other side, because you're flipping it over.
Yeah. So, but I mean, he used a couple of sheets of paper to figure it out, and boom, he made it. So then he started having them produced in metal at a local, sheet metal shop, and painting them up, and then he started selling them, no, locally, but he also sold one to the University of Nebraska. So that was maybe his breakthrough, where people start noticing this thing, and he files for a patent in 41. He gets the patent in like April of 42. Like 2 weeks later, I had said earlier he was in ROTC in college, and he was in the Army Reserves throughout that time. So World War II had just started, so he gets called up. So now he gives up his teaching job, joins, heads into the Army. And while he was in the Army during World War II, others started producing his flip style down markers and then selling them through the big sporting goods companies. So he gets back to the States. He was in Europe during the war. He gets back to the States, and they're using these flip style down markers all over the place. So he goes to some lawyers, and they basically say, well, this isn't like a high dollar value product. You're probably not going to get much out of suing these people, because he had told he told the companies, hey, you're violating my patent, and they had said, sue me, right? So he just decided not to pursue it for whatever reason, but mostly on the lawyer's advice. So he never really got anything out of it. He came up with this concept, brilliant in its simplicity, right? And really the only recognition that he got was in 83, when the Redskins were heading into the Super Bowl. He was profiled in the Washington Post with an article, basically telling the story that he had, about what had happened to him. So that article is helpful to me, but obviously I had to go figure out his background, the high schools, and all that kind of stuff. But the other thing just about this story is it's one of those where a lot of times some of my favorite stories are, this came about because, I mean, I'd kind of, I'd written a bunch of stuff in the past about these various down marker attempts. But this one came about because an in-law relative of his reached out to me and said, hey, do you know about this guy, this Roy C. Baker? And I was like, no, never heard of him. But then once I Googled or used newspapers.com to look for him, that Washington Post article popped up, and then it was just like, Katie bar the door, So anyways, I love the stories where it's connected to somebody's relative, a son, a daughter, grandchild, whatever, who's like, trying to figure out what the truth is behind their ancestor story, or their ancestral
giving the guy
story.
some recognition for a great invention too, that he didn't get credited for and paid for. So,
but really, I would guess from at least the early 50s, from then on until the dial-a-down came around, and that was like 87 or so, I think, is when that first came out. The flip style down marker was the down marker. I mean, you didn't see anything else on a football field. So,
right. Especially when they went to plastic. I know, because I know when I first started officiating in the 80s, we had metal ones. There were some plastic ones out there, but the plastic ones were great, especially like in our area when you started officiating, you would be for varsity games, you would hold the chains and do the down markers for the varsity games, watching the more senior officials do it. So you get those cold days in like October, November, and you're holding a metal pole. So your hand gets cold. You have a glove on. You're trying to do it one-handed, but the plastic ones are nice because you could just shake the pole a little bit and it would flip it. You could, if you did it just right and flipping, you didn't have to use both hands to flip the thing around. So we love the plastic ones.
Yeah. Well, but I think anybody who watched football and for whatever 30, 40-year period, um, the flipped style down marker was the only thing out there.
Yeah, I don't even remember seeing a dial down till probably the mid '90s in our area.
Yeah.
Everybody
Yeah.
still had the plastics, and especially lower level games, they
Yeah.
still use
Yeah.
the plastics, I think.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
flips.
Because those would have been more expensive and,
Right.
you know,
Yeah.
and it's like, do you really need to replace something that works? Because they still work. The flip style would still work just fine. So,
Now going back in before the flip style, when they had the traditional boxes, we've all seen images of them. I know there's some collectors on the vintage collector community that we're in that some guys have them. They have the wooden blocks, and like you said, did they where down did they where did they show the correct down? Was it to the
yeah.
players on the
Yeah,
field?
pointed to the field.
So if it's second down to two is facing the field.
That's right.
Okay.
And so, the funny thing, originally when they first were doing the down rod, initially it was just a rod, and the head linesman actually carried it around with him on the field. And so I've got pictures of, or I did another tidbit on this, but with a bunch of pictures of guys running up and down the field with these rods. So originally they didn't have any kind of box or anything. It was just it allowed them to kind of stick it into the ground, and you'd think they would have left it there, but anyways, they'd pick it up and run with it. And then then they started putting the boxes on the poles, but those were still like maybe up to waist height. They just weren't very tall. And then finally they put them up atop a pole that like rose above the assistant linesman's head. So eventually it got turned over to the assistant linesman, and they would, so I've got in this tidbit, I've got a picture of one of the older style ones that is one that's below the waist version, and then another one that's about as high as a flip down marker would have been, or even the current dial it down. So, at least that was visible to fans. The short ones, they were really only intended for the players and the officials because nobody else could see it.
Right.
I guess maybe the opposing sideline could see it and the opposing fans, but whoever was across the field could see it, but nobody behind that official would be able to see it.
Just a little sidebar going into the world of officiating. A lot of people don't know this, but the officials, the box is important because it's more so for the spot of the ball, and we all try to make sure, because the head linesman has his back to the chains in the box most of the time. So it's usually the line judge, which is on the opposite sideline, who's facing him, that's telling them, hey, it's, you're showing a 2 and it's third down. Because every official has rubber, like a piece of elastic. It goes on your wrist and it goes over your fingers. And people do it. Some guys would do it. If you put the rubber band on your forefinger, it's first down. You put it on your middle finger, it's second down. I did it and did a group of fingers. I had the rubber band around one finger, it was first down. Two fingers, it was second down, and so and that's why the officials are holding up a number, signaling to the other officials, so we're all on the same page. Hey, it's second down. Yeah, I got second down. And then you look at the box and say, okay, yes, you're showing second down. So that's just how the officials do it. So I don't know what they did prior to having those, when they had that rod. I'm sure they probably maybe did something unique like that. Or I heard some older guys that I did that started in the 50s when I started officiating, they used to hold pebbles in their hands. I don't know what they did with the pebble, if they switched hands or something, and I'm not coordinated enough to hold pebbles and blow a lanyard whistle that they used to have around their neck. It'd be kind of too much, but that's how the officials do the downs most of the time, just a piece of elastic on their fingers.
Yeah.
Those-
Well, they, like in the old catalogs, there's, for a long time they sold little, hand clicker things that would have down and distance, much like an umpire would use to keep track of balls and strikes. But for a long time, again, before official signals became, fairly standardized, a lot of times whoever was posting stuff on the scoreboard, they were kind of guessing, whether
Right.
there'd been a first down or not, because sometimes it wasn't clear. The officials didn't always signal things the way that we just assume they're going to today. So there's games where they had the wrong score on the scoreboard, for a long time. And so it was, thankfully, as much as I dislike sometimes hearing the referee talk during the games, it's communications is much better today than it has been in the past.
Yeah, and majority of them are pretty good at talking,
Yeah.
informing things. There are some guys that say some things you're like going, why would he even say that? But who knows? Of course,
Yeah,
why would they
mostly
call
it's just
something?
I just want to watch the game and not have to hear the explanation.
Exactly.
It's not really a criticism of the officials themselves. And some of
Right.
them actually have a really good sense of humor.
Right. It's Tim, that is it's a great piece, to talk about, some officiating equipment, something that all of us, when we go to a game, we look at, and, sometimes on television, we're seeing it comes into our view. You can see the downs. So it's just kind of cool to hear the history of that and, give some love to the guy that invented the one that probably lasted the longest of all the down markers, that flip style, which, I think everybody's familiar that's watched football at least the last 20 years or so. So, great piece of history there. And you have some little unique pieces like this a lot on your website. And maybe you could share with the folks how they can tune into some of these pieces that you have.
Sure. Just easiest thing is go to footballarchaeology.com, subscribe, and you'll get an email every time that I issue a new have a new post. You'll get an email into your box with that content. Alternatively, follow me on Twitter, on Substack, or on Threads. You can be one of about 6 or 7 people who follows me on Threads if you want to. And or just go on out and hit the site whenever you want, whenever you want to. I'll also just take a moment here to put in a plug. I've got a new book coming out called A History of the Football. So as far as I know, it is the first book to look at the history of the American football and the Canadian football. I cover their ball as well. So, it takes us back to the rugby days and then all the way really up until the present, just how it changed shape, size, colors, stripes, materials, etc. So just kind of a fun little read.
Yeah. And do you
Coming
have an
soon,
ETA?
coming soon to an Amazon site near you.
Okay. That's what I was going to ask you if you had a date set for release, but
I still do not. I do not, but
okay. But we'll get some information from you when it comes out officially. We'll make sure we share that with everybody too, but be looking forward to that. And do you have any place where people can pre-order or anything?
So I think there's some I'm running into a technical issue right now on the
Okay.
book, just related to the cover. And so, I think in order to allow pre-order, you have to have the cover ready.
Okay.
And
All right.
so,
All right.
so the answer is no for right
No
now.
problem. We'll just keep watching and
Yeah.
we'll keep posting when we know things on Pigskin Dispatch and keep watching Tim's social media and everything and footballarchaeology.com, and we'll figure out what's coming real soon. So it's a real exciting book. So can't wait to get my hands on it. So Tim, we really appreciate you coming on here and sharing aspects of this flip down and the dial down and the box and its history, and love to talk to you about another aspect of football history next week.
Yeah, I will be here. Look forward to chatting with you. Thank you, sir.
That's all the football history we have today, folks. Join us back tomorrow for more of your football history. we invite you to check out our website, pigskindispatch.com, not only to see the daily football history, but to experience positive football with our many articles on the good people of the game, as well as our own football comic strip, Cleat Marks Comics. Pigskindispatch.com is also on social media outlets, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and don't forget the Pigskin Dispatch YouTube channel to get all of your positive football news and history. Special thanks to the talents of Mike and Gene Monroe, as well as Jason Neff for letting us use their music during our podcast.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.